Teacher Aya, your grade 10 English teacher in YouTube. How are you today? Oh, I am pleased to know that you are doing all right. Time flies so fast. We are already on the 7th week of the 3rd quarter. Before we proceed to our lesson for today, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Also, hit that notification bell so you may be updated if I post a new video. For the past 2 weeks, we've already discussed 2 approaches in literary criticism. Today, we will learn another 2. They are the Feminism and Marxism approach. At the end of the lesson, you are expected to differentiate feminism from Marxism approach, express understanding of feminism and Marxism approaches, and critique a literary selection using feminism and Marxism approaches. So let's start with feminism approach. Feminism approach advocates gender equality, especially towards women. Feminist criticism is concerned with the ways in which literature reinforce or undermine the economic, political, social, and psychological oppression of women. This school of theory looks at how aspects of our culture are inherently patriarchal or male-dominated, and aims to expose misogyny in writing about women, which can take explicit and implicit forms. Feminist criticism is also concerned with less obvious forms of marginalization, such as the exclusion of women writers from the traditional literary canon, unless the critical or historical point of view is feminist. There is a tendency to underrepresent the contribution of women writers. Traditionally, feminist literary criticism has sought to examine all texts within literary canon through a new lens. Specific goals of feminist criticism include both the development and discovery of female traditional writing and rediscovering of old texts, while also interpreting symbolism of women's writing so that it will not be lost or ignored by the male point of view, and resisting sexism inherent in the majority of mainstream literature. These goals, along with the intent to analyze women writers and their writings from a female perspective and increase awareness of the sexual politics of language and style, were developed by Lisa Tuttle in the 1980s and have since been adopted by a majority of feminist critics. Feminist criticism has in many ways followed what some theorists called the 3 waves of feminism. The first wave, which was on the late 1700s to early 1900s, was about the inequalities between the sexes. So writers like Mary Wollstonecraft, in her literary work called A Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792, highlights this inequality. Activists like Susan B. Anthony and Victoria Woodhull contribute to the women's suffrage movement, which leads to national universal suffrage in 1920 with the passing of the 19th Amendment. The second wave was on early 1960s to the late 1970s. Building on more equal working conditions necessary in America, especially during the World War II, movements such as the National Organization for Women, formed in 1966, cohere feminist political activism. Writers like Simone de Beauvoir and Elaine Showalter established the groundwork for the dissemination of feminist theories dovetailed with the American Civil Rights Movement. The third wave is during the early 1990s up to the present, resisting the perceived essentialist ideologies and the white heterosexual, middle-class focus, and second-wave feminism. Third-wave feminism borrows from post-structural and contemporary gender and race theories to expand on marginalized populations' experiences. Writers like Alice Walker work to reconcile it with the concerns of the Black community. The survival and wholeness of her people, men and women, both, and for the promotion of dialogue and community, as well as for the valorization of women and of all the varieties of work women perform. The following are some typical questions that are answered using the feminist criticism. Is the author male or female? Is the text narrated by a male or female? What types of roles do women have in the text? Are the female characters the protagonist or secondary and minor characters? Do any stereotypical characterizations of women appear? How does the author's culture influence his or her attitude? And what are the attitudes of male characters towards the female characters? Now we have some sample work wherein feminist criticism was used. Little Women, which was currently seen in Netflix. Canterbury Tales, particularly Wife of Bath. So students can begin approaching great writers inspired by considering this work by Chaucer. Another is Dr. Emma Smith's podcast on the comedy of errors. This alludes to the valuation of Elizabethan comedy as a commentary on gender and sexuality, and how the comedy of errors at first seems to defy this tradition. You can answer the question, what are the differences between depictions of women written by male and female novelists? Now let's move to Marxism Approach. This concerns class differences, economic, as well as the implications and complications of the capitalist system. Moreover, it is interested in answering the overarching question, whom does it work or whom does it benefit, the elite or the middle class? Now, a little background about Marxism. Marxism was introduced by Karl Marx, and Karl Marx studies have provided a basis for much in socialist theory and research. Marxism aims to revolutionize the concept of work through creating a classless society built on control and ownership of the means of production. In Marx's thought, it is only the proletariat or the working class that must achieve class consciousness. The bourgeoisie is already quite well aware of its position and power in the capitalist paradigm. As individuals, workers know that they are being exploited in order to produce surplus value produced by the worker that is appropriated by the capitalists. However, the working class must realize that they are being exploited not only as individuals but as a class. It is upon this realization that the working class reaches class consciousness. In literature, most Marxist critics subscribe to what has come to be called vulgar Marxism. In this thinking of the structure of societies, literary texts are one register of the superstructure, which is determined by the economic base of any given society. Therefore, literary texts are a reflection of the economic base rather than the social institutions from which they originate. For all social institutions, or more precisely human social relationships, are in the final analysis determined by the economic base. According to Marxists, even literature itself is a social institution and has a specific ideological function based on the background and ideology of the author. The aim of Marxist criticism is to explain the literary work more fully, and this means a sensitive attention to its forms, styles, and meanings. But it also means grasping those forms, styles, and meanings as the product of a particular history. Marx himself often treated literature as simple propaganda for the ruling classes. There is some truth to this. For instance, in a feudal society, people loved chivalric romances, stories about knights, like this that you can see on the pictures, who fight for honor and win their lady's love. In today's capitalistic society, many people enjoy watching James Bond, which celebrate the glamorous lifestyle of the modern gentleman, the ladies' man who dresses in expensive clothes and drives fast cars. In these cultural fantasies, it is the aristocrat who comes to our rescue and saves us from imaginary villains that seek to destroy the status quo. Marxist theory may seem far removed from Wordsworth's poem I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. But before we go on to that, let us have some of the typical questions that can be answered using the Marxist criticism. So we have, whom does it benefit if the work or effort is accepted or believed? What is the social class of the author? Which class does the work claim to represent? What values does it reinforce? What values does it subvert? What conflict can be seen between the values the work champions and those it portrays? What social classes do the characters represent? How do characters from different classes interact or conflict? Now let's go to the sample work wherein Marxist criticism was used. So I've already mentioned the poem written by Wordsworth, which is entitled I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. So we have taken some lines. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. These are lines 17 and 18. The daffodils provide a wealth that is metaphysical and not material. Yet why use the word wealth, and what is its significance? From a Marxist perspective, the poem can be considered both a criticism of materialistic attitudes and a reflection of the language of commodification. Another, so still from that poem, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. It's like the daffodils are bringing happiness to the persona in the poem. Okay, the adoration of the flowers is rather similar to what Marx called the fetishism of commodities. When we treat traded goods as having an intrinsic value, we are guilty of fetishism. We do this all the time. We endow commodities with personalities and act as if our lives are incomplete without them. We have to have the latest gadget or toy, even though the value of these things is artificial and is driven by a kind of superstitious faith in the idea that prices are natural. In the same way, Wordsworth personifies the daffodils as animate, living beings, and he ties his own happiness to theirs. Like a commodity, the scene is best enjoyed in secret, in some private or internal space, which is the mind and the home. So this is all about feminism and Marxism approaches in literary criticism. I hope you learned something from our presentation. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'll see you again next time. God bless.